Hello everybody, welcome to number 27. Now recently I have been a really lucky boy because I've had a run of really interesting cars, but today there is something that again has been on my wish list for such a long time. Take a look. Welcome to the Alfa Romeo Montreal. This is a car which was super futuristic looking, but actually quite backward facing. And this explains why at the time of launch, it was really a pretty big flop, despite those absolutely sensational looks and incredible race-derived engine. But let's take it out and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it, about how it drives, why it failed at the time, and how it stacks up today. So the Montreal was first seen at the World's Fair in 1967, I think, and it was, there's a bit of a blind spot on the 3/4, which is slightly terrifying. Anyway, back to the World's Fair, 1967. Alfa Romeo showed this car, and legend has it that they had such an amazing, spectacular reaction to it that they just had to put it into production. We don't really know if that's true, but what is sure is that at that time they were just pensioning off the 2600 GT, which was their sort of range topper. So they did need something to replace it. This looked fantastic, and from the side with those strakes, it kind of gave the image that perhaps it was a mid-engine car. Gandini was the one who styled it while he was still at Bertone. Did an amazing job. That prototype, I believe, still had a 4-cylinder engine. When it was first launched though, it didn't come with any puny 4-cylinder. It came with the absolute jewel in the crown. Not only was it an Alfa Romeo V8, but it was a race-derived V8 from the Tipo 33, Type 33 racer, which had won the Targa Florio, Le Mans, and Daytona as well. So an engine and a racing car with a really illustrious heritage. So the V8 was enlarged from 2 litres in the original 33 to 2.5 or 2.6. It has Spica fuel injection, it has a single spark plug instead of twin spark, and it has a cross-plane crank instead of the flat plane crank. 195 horsepower in a car that weighed 1300 kilograms, so quite heavy for the time, definitely. What could be better once you have these fabulous looks than slotting in such an incredible engine with such heritage? In a way, as we'll find out, that's kind of like this car's downfall at the same time. Although it was hotly anticipated, they only ever sold 4,000 of these, well 3,900, and even those they really struggled to get out. There's a couple of reasons for that. The first was that, like many of these cars launched in the early 70s, it fell foul of the oil crisis. But the other thing is that when it was first sort of tested, the reactions were, I would say, lukewarm at best. The engine got lots of praise for the way it sounded, the way it went, but overall the car was felt to be too slow for the price. It was the same price as a Ferrari Dino. So it was felt to be too slow, but also I think probably the worst thing of all is it didn't handle the way it looked, I suppose. It wasn't a great handler, and there was a reason for that. I'm really lucky today because this car is at Not Normal Racing in Woodstock. Anton, my friend, has been doing some work to it, and so I've been able to get it up on the ramp, and we can have a look for ourselves at how these sort of mechanicals compare to the 105 series, which this is supposed to be based on. So the front end, as you can see, Anton's done a load of work. He's changed the ball joints, all the suspension bushes. It's got new shocks as well, so that's going to be nice for me taking it out today. But as you can see, these wishbones are definitely 105. I'm sure they changed the spring rates because this is a much heavier lump, and the damping. But as far as I can see, and I'm sure you will correct me if I'm wrong on that, the suspension layout here at the front anyway is completely standard 105. I can't really see any differences. If we go down to the back of the car, again, there is that typical sort of axle arrangement that the 105s has. I don't think I've ever seen one with this sump cooler. This has a limited slip diff, as did most 105s. I think 1750s and above had that. But again, this is completely the same layout as you would get into 105s, with the trailing arms, the solid axle, and then there is a sort of stabilizing T-piece somewhere. Oh, there we go. That's the sort of stabilizer that help locates the axle. But all in all, this is pretty much standard 105 series. Probably not quite up to the job of dealing with that engine. So not only was that running gear quite old, really, because you can trace it back to 1963, but it was always designed for some quite light four-cylinder engines up front, not for the V8, which was significantly heavier. Now, there are many cars that, when they first come out, they're not really appreciated, they're flops, but over time they can develop a real following, and the Montreal is one of those cars, and I think it's absolutely thoroughly deserved. The looks are so iconic and so Italy of the sort of 60s and 70s that on looks alone, it's a significant car. The engine, having that sort of race heritage, okay, maybe it's not in the best package, but it's a very, very special engine, something you don't get too often. And what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to pull off into this junction and we'll give it a pull through the gears and just see how it goes and what it sounds like. Okay, let's go. Okay, well, maybe it wasn't very quick. It's supposed to be 7.5, 8 seconds to 60, depending on who you ask. But it does not feel like a slouch at all. Maybe it's because of the kind of, you're sitting low, you got the growl from that race-derived V8. And also the chassis moves around a fair bit, so I guess it kind of, it gives you a bit more drama, but to me it definitely doesn't feel slow, and that engine is just fabulous. It's weird because when you first start it up and when you just sort of pull away, it sounds and feels a little bit like an American V8, but once you're underway it behaves quite differently. It's quite happy to rev and it's got a subtly different sound. And one of the things I realized when I was doing that pull through the gears and then I tried to brake for the next bend is that the brakes are pretty woeful. The pedal is pretty wooden. They don't have a huge amount of stopping power, and I think Anton may have tried to already sort those out, so I think they're just like that. They're pretty scary. The ride is supremely good. The seating position is great for me. It's what you want in a sort of 70s GT. Yes, my legs are a little bit scrunched up. The pedal box is a bit too far forward, but I can stretch out my left leg once it's in sort of 4th or 5th gear. So this wouldn't make a bad cruiser at all. You rest your light leg on there. The ride, did I say it already? Supremely great. It really is good, I guess, with those sort of fat tyres, with a fat profile, and reasonably soft suspension. You are permanently aware that there is a lot of weight at the front, and any time that you chuck this into a corner, it feels like it wants to go wide and wallow. Those old mechanicals, I think, are to blame for that. They did upgrade the suspension a little bit, but in terms of spring rates, I think mainly spring rates and damping, but it's just, it can't really quite handle it. It feels innately understeery. Now it could be this car belongs to Amanda Stretton, who is the amazing racing driver and TV presenter, but it could be that someone like Amanda could perhaps balance it on the throttle through the corners to take out a bit of that understeer. I'm not going to try that today. As long as you're smooth and you pilot it, I know it sounds a bit stupid, you pilot it a little bit like a ship, just sort of point it through the apex gently. Because the ride is so good, the engine's so flexible, you can still make progress. So it's not slow, it just has to be driven with a certain amount of respect. A little technical S like this, I think, is going to be quite difficult for it, especially a tight corner like this. And it did a little bit better than I was expecting, but what is lovely is, you pull it all the way through to sort of 6.5 and it sounds wonderful. Got a little bit of a tractor here that is getting in the way. I can see why this car was a flop. I think that, the biggest reason why it was a flop really was to do with the oil crisis, but it was also very expensive and technically it wasn't quite good enough. But if we fast forward to today and to sort of a classic status that the Montreal has, I think it's quite a different story, because you don't care as much that it's not the sharpest thing. You're quite happy to drive it around a bit slower, enjoy that engine, and as long as you don't push it, I think it's comfortable, it's got incredible charm, and it does actually work pretty well. The steering is incredibly low geared, but that's probably a good thing, because with the chassis being challenged like this, you don't really want a nervous front end. It has worm and roller steering, I think, so it's got that lovely fluid, oily feeling that 105s get, which is really, really nice. The gearbox is another sort of something a bit Jekyll and Hyde about this car, really. It's a ZF unit, and it's slow, it's heavy, and it's not cheap, and yet despite that, it's actually lovely to use. If you like your cars that need to be driven, it's positive, it's got some weight to it, you're changing gear, it's got a metallic feel. So as a whole, as part of the car, the way the engine sounds, the heft of the car generally, because it does feel like a heavy car, it works quite well with that. Those dials are absolutely balmy, crazy Alfa 70 stuff. I don't know what they were thinking. I love them, but they are just so mental. Something else that really, really makes me chuckle about this car is that maybe they didn't spend that much on the chassis, but they had enough left over to make sure that there was a special horn there. So this car actually has two types. You have your normal horn, but then if you really want someone to get out of your way quickly, you can flick the switch and way louder. Only the Italians. So how should history judge the Montreal? It's definitely a car which is challenged in terms of dynamics. In terms of sales, it was a flop, but does it deserve the iconic status which is kind of has reached today? And I think it absolutely does. It just doesn't matter so much now that it is a little bit woolly, a little bit floppy. It's still a fantastic thing to sort of chuck around. The design is absolutely fabulous. They have appreciated massively, but I still think these are kind of undervalued for what you get. They're just fabulous, unique things. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you so much, Amanda, for lending me the car. Thanks, Anton, for helping out and arranging it as well. I really look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you so much. Please follow if you haven't already subscribed, and see you soon.